People suck. Look, you can't get mad at me for that. I'm just saying out loud what you think. We're all on edge. We're at our wits' end. And the real reason? People. They're always to blame, right? They're always just so... humans. And everywhere we look, we're surrounded by people who just seem to be out to ruin our day, right? They're all out to get us. Seriously? Is that how you see the world? You desperately need this episode. We've been talking about what makes people so insufferable. And a big part of that is rooted in education and learning. Those crucial stages of human development early on that dictate who and what we are and end up being. But we can bypass some of those trauma triggers, and I'm going to tell you how. In this episode, I'm going to explain my S.O.A.P philosophy on educating others, and I'll teach you how to better deal with people, places, and things that may send you over the edge into a full-blown TikTok takedown temper tantrum. You do not want to get caught up in one of those. Where you end up losing your mind on someone in public, and then some selfish jackhole ends up recording it and posts it for the masses. Well, then listen up, because I'm going to teach you how to better deal with all those stressors using cups. And welcome to the podcast. I cautiously encourage us to ponder the possibilities of uncertainty. I've argued that we're sort of wagering our souls, standing so firmly on things we aren't even so sure about, right? And aren't we violating a key commandment from God, celebrating men? Anybody with holidays of reverence, statues, and what amounts to idol worship? I've argued that that level of hypocritical cultism is prevalent in our culture, from sports teams to name brand products to our music, video games, phones, automobiles, news, and media, and every aspect of our lives. We're Coke or Pepsi, we're McDonald's or Wendy's. Sorry, Burger King, get better fries. Who's got the best chicken sandwich? Oh my God, Burger King and Popeyes are literally the same company with the same chicken sandwich. That isn't even a civil war. It's just, genius marketing to a society that doesn't look any further than a headline. We all have an opinion. We all show our loyalties on literally everything that matters and doesn't. In many cases, we defend those opinions and loyalties till we're frothing at the mouth. But we rarely consider why we chose which things, icons, brands, or ideas we're devoted to. The same is true with ideals, political beliefs, religious beliefs, and even the very values that form the principles on which we coexist. In my episode, The Human Hat Rack, where I compared us to those standing hat racks where we stack all the various hats we wear in life, how we prioritize them, and if we aren't careful in building a strong foundation for our human hat rack, we risk overloading it, making it unbalanced, thus causing it and us to topple over. I made the case for the education and learning, that those were the key factors in how well prepared we are in life to even wear those hats, much less keep our human hat rack vertical. A constant, consistent commitment to learning, knowing, and understanding is what separates mankind from beast, after all. You don't see deer and antelope cracking books to learn how to better avoid those vicious predators, do you? No, they're too busy on the range playing. We are the sentient species on the planet, right? The term sentience was coined by philosophers in the 17th century, the 1630s for those paying close attention, to differentiate between living beings capable of feeling or perceiving, those with a consciousness, to those animals just running on instinct alone. Sentience is essentially the distinguishment between living beings capable of feeling and those who can't. Back then, the term sentience was derived from the Latin word sentientum, which just means feeling. So, more modernly defined, sentience is the ability to feel or experience sensation. Simply all it means. Some argue dogs, for example, are sentient, which is a great example for this episode, right? Animals, many pets specifically, the ones we choose to domesticate, well, we choose to domesticate for a reason: sentience. We can bond with something that can feel. Why maybe fish are a little more disposable. Some of it has to do with lifespan expectancy and physical touch, but a lot of it is looking in their eyes and seeing something similar to what we see in ourselves. Sentience. But dogs are daffy, dumb in fact, compared to many other animals. You can train them, you can break their animal instincts somewhat, you can make them less daffy, but dogs, just by nature, well, have a nature. They are sentient, but they'll also run right out in front of a car if you let them. They are sentient, but they'll also eat their own shit. They are sentient, but they'll literally hump anything. They are sentient, but they aren't sapient. Sapience is the ability to think and capacity for intelligence, the possibility to obtain wisdom, self-awareness. I fell into the trap of mixing these two words up for a while. I read the word sentience in a Star Wars novel years ago and looked it up and started using it. I guess I didn't look up sapience until a few years later. So here's a quick cheat. Sapient is like Homo sapien, human. Humans have higher order thinking, the self-awareness, the ability to think beyond just animal instinct. That's the difference in the two words. That is also a huge difference in people. What I've discovered, is that some people lack sapience and sentience. Or they have a strange sociopathic ability to just turn that on and off when they choose. Yeah, a lot of people are like dogs, no thinking, intelligence, or wisdom, just animal instincts, playing in traffic, wanting to hump anything in sight, and eating shit. More eloquently put, many people today have bypassed the sapience and sentience and just operate on base animal rage. When I discuss this toxic white Southern culture, this culture of cultism that I'm deconstructing in this show, this dumbing down and numbing down of society, this is a big chunk of the foundation of those ideas. Compassion, empathy, these are things we must practice, I believe. I'm not sure these are our animal instincts. I'm not entirely convinced human nature is to encourage sentience or sapience. I think that's an evolutionary quality that's been passed down over generations, and those who aren't really capable of sentience or sapience sort of just fake it till they make it or get exposed. Cancel culture gets them maybe. Maybe it isn't that our nature is to be evolved, but we must evolve as a daily practice and teach that evolution so that we don't devolve into our animal instincts. Think about that. What if some people just lacked the ability to easily access their feelings and critical thinking? What if some humans were biologically incapable of sentience or sapience? They could function, they could operate and pass for actual humans because social norms and mores, because those norms that are rooted in our religious beliefs, there's more at stake in us adhering to those norms and mores. But if we really accepted our true natures, maybe we'd find that we are almost different species of humans altogether. Those with the lizard brains and those with actual human brains. Look, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, mocking some of their conspiracy theories, sure, but don't take me literally. Let's try and look at what I'm saying more metaphorically. What if there really was a biological brain science DNA distinguishment between people who were incapable of higher order reasoning and empathy and those who could process complex ideas, see bigger picture thinking, feel compassion for others? This can easily veer off into a eugenics conversation if we aren't careful. That is a discussion to have, and I have more on eugenics, the history behind it, and America's obsession with it coming up later in this season. Eugenics, which was mostly familiarized with Adolf Hitler's Aryan master race delusion, hypothesized that through the careful and meticulous elimination of some undesirable traits, characteristics, flaws, disorders, imperfections, basically Hitler thought he could breed the best of the best, sort of like Weird Science. But only clipping pictures from magazines like Field and Stream, Guns and Ammo, and the National Review. And then only clipping the beautiful blonde hair, blue-eyed perfect gods and goddesses from those. I know what you're thinking. How is that a bad thing? We do it with horses and dogs, and it's just that who decides which traits are undesirable? And in fact, which traits are undesirable and why is the issue. You see, those are subjective to say the least. In Hitler's case, things like black, Jewish, freckles, homosexual, different than Thor, even though he was a dark-haired little troll, all of that? Well, eugenics gets a bad rap in this country. For a good reason, even though we still practice it today. Or did you think trying to pair your kid up with another kid from a good family wasn't for the purpose of ensuring your grandchildren would come from good stock? Livestock. More on that later on this season. Moving on. It's almost like there are two separate species of human in this country, doesn't there? There are the people who are good people and the people who act like good people. I know, you're thinking, well, what about the bad people? Think about that. The people you know are bad, they're obvious. At some point, they acted good and were exposed or pushed over the line, right? Bad, too, is subjective and often the result of an unresolved trauma in a society that doesn't really encourage dealing with your traumas. Not excusing, explaining toxicity. So fake it till you make it, or until you're exposed. Those people are all still pretending, putting on this facade so we don't realize what they are. I've said it before, they might feed your dogs while you're on vacation, they may even look out for you on occasion. But when the chips are down and you stand face to face with them as ideological opposition, the lengths they'll go to in order to preserve the fragile realities, their pride, ego, and misconception of honor, justice, and higher loyalties will fatally exceed what you will do to preserve truth. Because bad people, or people only pretending to be good, will always go farther than good people are willing to go. That's a revelation that should make us all feel a little dirty. But fear not, I have a solution to clean that stench off of us. S.O.A.P. No, not that obvious. This is an acronym and a philosophy for learning. I'm leading up to my C.U.P.S philosophy on how to deal with stressful people and events in our lives. This will help you live a more peaceful life. I'm also going to share with you one of the most personal and painful experiences from my childhood to help illustrate my points. In the previous episode, the human mathematical equation, I discussed how we are the sum of all our parts, especially our trauma. Knowing yourself is the first step to knowing others. And to understand another person, we must approach them as a mathematical equation. To fill in the missing info, solve for X. Learning plays such an integral role. I mentioned my S.O.A.P philosophy on learning, teaching, and education. I use those three separate words deliberately. Learning focuses on the self-growth and the taking in of new information. Teaching really is about the delivery of that information to others and focuses on the self-awareness of ourselves as teachers of others, whether we have a classroom of students or not. Education is a larger, more institutional and systematic idea. From the earliest learning in the home, reading to your child even, to formal public education and on to post-secondary education training, learning, education is bigger than classrooms and textbooks. It's about how we evolve a society or not. I've talked about that well-rounded base of our human hat rack and how those four legs are stages of early development, and that a flat, round base for those legs to stand and distribute all the weight of all the hats we wear, that really is the solidification of those four different learning stages: early childhood, primary, middle and high school, and post-secondary education. My S.O.A.P philosophy ensures that stable base for your hat rack, so we can be better at everything we do, including feeling and thinking. It's quite simple. Reimagine the way we educate children from the very beginning of learning with a four-pronged approach: social, occupational, academic, and practical. Social learning is the interpersonal communication, interaction, social norms and mores, understanding how to be a person amongst other people. Occupational learning would encompass all of the things one might need along the way to earn their living in a society. Career skills, skilled labor, technical training, and things like that can lead to a paycheck or some professional trade-off. Academic learning, too, is an all-encompassing of social, occupational, and practical. Our last problem. The academic learning would be the books and arts, philosophy, science, the literature and writing, and all of the things one requires to be someone who knows more things than the cast members and spouses' names of every season of Real Housewives. Practical learning is the day-to-day skills one needs to exist without being a total burden to everyone around them. Driving, cooking, basic personal budgeting, accounting, basic mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and other knowledge that one should know. There may be academic principles to this, and they might cross over to occupational learning or be the foundation of occupational learning. This S.O.A.P approach, it's a big overlapping Venn diagram. They all relate to each other and they're all reliant on one another. I absolutely adore acronyms, almost as much as I adore alliteration. But S.O.A.P isn't just clever wordplay. It's a philosophy that's bred out of understanding that this is what's missing from my development and yours. I never felt like I excelled academically, and I think a lot of that is due to the way that I was taught. Nothing against specific teachers, mind you. It's just that what we know today about children and how they learn, how different children learn, and how different children learn differently. It's overwhelming. We fail our students so much. In America, our potential is almost never met. I keep thinking back to how difficult I had it at home and in school and even after school in the real world, and this S.O.A.P approach, God, it could have helped me so much. Look, I struggled socially. I struggled figuring out my path occupationally. I struggled academically. I struggled practically, all for very different reasons, but all for the same reason too: trauma. Socially, I was bullied. I was awkward. I was a mess. My confidence was rattled. Even when I broke out of that, I just broke out in toxic, obnoxious, trying too hard to be funny for all the wrong reasons ways. Occupationally, just like everyone, I had influences and input from everywhere I turned. I lacked a proficiency in anything except using my mouth or brain. I didn't grow up in an environment that knew how to nurture those talents or attributes. Academically, I explained in the previous episode about my journey through struggling with math. It was definitely true that if I wasn't interested in it, I found the easiest way around it. I definitely had undiagnosed and untreated learning challenges, if even just ADHD. I had depression, mental illness, anxiety, trauma, all of that impacted my academic confidence. So I learned how to excel in learning while being content with getting C's. 2.86 was my high school GPA. That was fueled on a lot of home ec classes. Practically, I joke sometimes that I yield to experts. I hire people to do the work I can't do. Except I'm smart enough to learn stuff, I just didn't want to. I was afraid as a kid that if I learned those essential skills of labor, electrical, carpentry, plumbing, any of that, if I ever learned how to use a tool, then I'd be stuck only ever using that tool for the rest of my life, and I wouldn't listen to my dad when he tried to show me something because I didn't want to get stuck in that town, and somehow I know learning practical skills translated into settling for less. Don't worry if that sounds stupid to you. It does to me too. Except that mentality, as toxic and irrational as it was back then, seemed to have kept me from getting focused on something other than my goals. It just made me fork out big bucks to have somebody come out and do something I should have easily done myself. But in each of these areas, social and environmental factors influence my attitudes. The people I met who used tools didn't reflect the qualities I wanted to embody or the kind of life I wanted to live. It wasn't an indictment on their character at all. Bullies make it harder to focus on school or work. These S.O.A.P areas can make us all better if we would only embrace a different philosophy on how a child should be released into the adult world. My childhood wasn't ideal. Yes, it shaped me. It made me who I am today, but it wasn't easy. And when trauma happens, it's fight or flight. We revert into those base animal instincts. Our sapience is out the window, and our sentience is too, if we aren't careful. I'm going to share with you the most painful event of my childhood, the thing that traumatized me and set the stage for everything after. I'm going to tell you how it almost destroyed me, how it could have turned me into a cynical monster, and how C.U.P.S saved me from all of that. In my journey of deconstruction, overthinking everything about me, my home life growing up, I don't recall a lot of it, to be honest. I remember some of the traumatic events very clearly, but the day-to-day stuff, it's hit and miss. Maybe that's how it is for others. I'm not others. My parents didn't have a good marriage while I was alive. I'm not certain when it went bad, but it got really toxic after I was school-aged. I can't speak for anything before I got there. Without getting into a lot of my parents' private lives that isn't really my business to divulge, I just recall from my perspective, one day I walked in the kitchen and was told Mom wasn't there and wasn't coming back. And when I asked for more info, I was told, "You'll understand when you're older." I found that offensive on so many levels, that sentence. For many years, even though my sister was spot on, I do understand now that I'm older. However, I feel like an opportunity was missed, to explain it to me then so I wouldn't repeat the same mistakes, or maybe could adjust properly to the trauma. No, an 8-year-old boy probably doesn't need a hard lesson in adult relationship dynamics. I walked around with this "you'll understand when you're older" chip on my shoulder for most of my life. Granted, that fueled my desire to understand when I was older. It led to this. However, without blaming anyone, I believe more could have been done in my case. Therapy was for crazies back then, remember? I remember a lot of negativity and toxicity. Read the book for details. But basically, Mom and Dad split up. Mom went to live in Nashville. Me, my brother and sister, and Dad lived a couple hours away. A couple of years later, my mom picked me up from school for visitation, and we went on the run for a while. Yeah, I was kidnapped. I learned my mom had been married prior to my dad and that my siblings had a different biological father and that my dad had adopted them before I was born. A lot of waves of secrets crashing against this shore all at once. And my grandmother had let it slip, the real brother and sister line, a little bit prior, and I didn't really get square answers at the time, but it led me down this rabbit hole of searching for the lies I was being told. And I knew I was being told lies. I just didn't know what they were. Imagine that for a moment. I'm somewhere around 10 to 12 years old while this is going on. My reality is fluid, and I don't know what's what. I just know I've uncovered some really dark secrets, at least to a kid. And so I felt like my whole life was a big old lie. And this wasn't the only event that falls into this category. But being taken out of school, away from my friends, my life, being caught in the middle of a legal and custody battle, meeting with the judge behind closed doors, and subsequently being separated from my siblings as I went to live with my dad. And my brother chose to go to live with my mom where he knew he'd have an easier path. Dad was hard. I didn't want to leave my brother, but I didn't want to live with Mom. I wanted to live with my dad. My friends were back there. This is a condensed version, and there's a lot more trauma to unpack in my childhood. This was just one of the most painful events of my personal history, and an event that forced me into a corner of trust, issues, and fear. My many feelings on so many things have been affected by these traumatic events. The kidnapping, the lies I was told as a kid. I spent so many years hating my mother for her selfishness, maybe for her leaving, maybe for her coming back and taking me, maybe for sending me back to my dad, because even my perception of those events through most of my life was wrong. I lived my life thinking my dad fought for me, won custody, end of story. His side anyway. But I learned later in life that's not entirely true. The more to the story, at least concerning me, was that after my mom took me, she got a job opportunity that would have required her to travel long term, to live a vagabond journey person lifestyle. Either way, this opportunity meant Mom was pulling up her roots, buying an RV, and hitting the open road to be a tradesperson. My mom was a master paper hanger in the 80s in Nashville. She was good at what she did. She did a lot of work for famous folks and big jobs back when wallpaper was a thing. Basically, she couldn't take me. 10 or 11, I'd have to be homeschooled if I went with Mom, and I guess that was just a little bit more than she could handle. It wasn't feasible. So shipped back to that racist little town and that racist little man I went, a chip on my shoulder and some mommy issues, not aided at all by a toxic misogynistic culture and a bitter spurned divorcee single father. I believe I spent many years with toxic attitudes towards women, relationships, sex, sexuality, and many aspects of life because of this trauma. I'm not blaming my parents, though. I don't think anyone was suited to go through what they went through. And who knows what, if any, therapy either of them got. Traumatized people bouncing through life, traumatizing others. Just like I've become. Just like all of us. My father and I spoke in depth about a lot of things while he was alive. We resolved a lot, left nothing unsaid. A blessing very few get. But the hard questions come after they're gone. But while he was here, we left it all on the table. My mother and I talked deeply about things. We've addressed those issues from the past, but it was a perspective I couldn't comprehend. I still never understood. I just forgave far too late in life because I didn't understand. Until I went through my own toxic marriage and my own toxic divorce and my own children, my own child ripped away from me and kept away from me for years. In the most universally ironic storyline I couldn't write if this was a movie, it was only until I hit the absolute rock bottom emotionally, when I no longer knew when my ex would follow the court-ordered parenting plan and allow me to talk to my child again, when I couldn't hear her voice or her laugh, when nothing in this world seemed just because I was denied what I felt was a basic right as a parent, a human being. Only then did I fully understand why my mother might have shown up at school that day. My father was abusive and ideologically dangerous. For a child, anyway, to be around unsupervised at times, anyway. My mother knew that. My parents' custody issues weren't anything like what I went through fighting for my daughter. Not better or worse, just much different. But going through it as a child and then as a parent offered a perspective that was invaluable. And now that I've cleared those treacherous waters and the custody battle for my daughter's over, I can say I always felt like the ultimate failure as a parent for not being willing to go that far. Did I even love my child if I wasn't willing to just go take her and raise her in safety? Between my mom and my dad growing up the way I did and going through it as an adult, I almost felt for a while like I was given a playbook to improve upon. And I was. After all, what do you do when a system is both unjust and unbeatable? I was given a cheat sheet, I guess. I was taught what not to do. And so I took the high road, and that wasn't easy. I just knew that being kidnapped traumatized me and what the repercussions for me, my family, and my friends was back then. Sometimes you don't get situations where the right thing to do is clear. When the court system that's supposed to uphold your rights turns its back on you, when the partner who swore they'd never keep you away from your child does just that, you learn things about yourself. In reflecting on that, it's clear that a lot of my choices and perspective while fighting for my own daughter were through the lens of my own childhood experiences of anxiety, depression, abandonment, and being caught in the middle. Trauma. How I felt about my parents is not how I wanted my kids to feel about their dad. Trauma. And then dating, making friends, trying to explain to people what I was going through. No one understood. There was judgment. Look, when your story is unbelievable, you're just another red flag. Trauma. Maybe that's too much, but I believe it illustrates my point better than any other example I could find. Thanks to therapy, I'm no longer that resentful little boy clamoring for his mommy's approval, afraid that every knock on the door is someone taking me away. My mother and I are close as can be now, and I understand her on a completely different level. I couldn't ask for a better relationship, closer in proximity maybe, better health, but I absolutely love my mom. And I know she loves me, and more than that little boy I was, I know now that she loved me then. I just couldn't see it then. I was too young, not experienced enough. I didn't grow up with that S.O.A.P philosophy. I certainly didn't know how to see my mother's perspective. So I walked around with only a part of my mother's math forming all my opinions of her, my childhood, and every woman I would come into contact with thereafter. We can debate whether an earlier understanding of these factors would have changed anything, but undoubtedly it was easier for me to hate my mother, to dehumanize her, than it was to see her as a thinking and feeling being, struggling with issues. Because if I saw her that way, I might see my father in a less favorable light, and he was my foundation as a kid. I had to selectively switch off that sentience and sapience for the sake of survival. Today, I'm trained not only in perspective and communication, but human development and the social sciences. Understanding these disciplines opens many doors inside my mind when confronting other people. It's like adding tools to my toolbox. Perspective helps, compassion helps, but if you need one item in your toolbox, it's cups. Conflict, stress comes at us each and every day in many different ways. These incidences can form mental or emotional trauma if dealt with improperly. From a marriage and children to a coworker who just gets on your nerves to a family who voted for fascism, cups can help you recalibrate your negative self into a more positive attraction. Even in dredging up old traumas, like custodial kidnappings, abuse, neglect, or any number of more seemingly minor and even major traumas. Cups can help you process these events and help you better deal with future events and keep them from stealing your joy. It's basic math. I'll explain. Whether you're in a personal or professional situation, conflict can be stressful. Cups is a technique I sort of came up with in my own head years ago, and it just stuck, and I'm sharing it publicly for the first time today. By now, you've probably guessed Cups is an acronym. I mean, you could use cups to resolve conflict. I've been in those relationships, but I never advocate throwing things at your conflict partner. I can dodge them like the Matrix, though. Cups is very simple, and using this technique will help you resolve conflict better, thus making you a better communicator, friend, partner, coworker, and overall human being. Stick with me for a few more minutes, and let's break this down, because this is really important for you. Just like with all of the examples, stories, and tidbits I've shared, using what I'm about to tell you can help you pull your own examples, stories, and tidbits from your own life and will help you apply this technique to analyze the situations for better emotional outcomes. Do what I'm about to tell you, and you'll feel better. I promise. Compassion. Now, it seems like I placed the very hardest task first, but I assure you, to even the most gentle and generous-natured of us, all four of these are difficult. A mantra I've been preaching for a few years now is, let compassion be your default setting. Like in a computer settings. In that, I mean, when someone says or does something to you that strikes your ire, pause for a moment and ask, why would they behave this way? Often we fall into the trap of finishing that thought with, why would they behave this way toward me? Which ends up being less an actual question and more a rhetorical statement of personal offense. How dare they? Almost like turning it around to, what did I do to deserve this? The focus is then turned on us, making it all about me. That's not healthy, productive, or compassionate. It's narcissistic behavior. We need to turn the camera lens on the perceived offender. We are unlikely to make it past compassion if we only focus on the defensive position, which we do when we feel attacked. So, rather than painting ourselves into a defensive corner, taking things personally that may or may not have anything to do with us specifically, what did I do? We aim for, why would they behave this way? And just leave it at that. It's basic syntax and grammar. But by thinking of them first, then, if applicable, considering why that action would be taken against you, we allow ourselves to consider the point of view or perspective of the other person. You see the difference? Why would they behave this way versus why do I deserve this from them? And maybe your internal phrasing is different, but I'll bet the logic and sentiments are similar. Even the most compassionate of us can fall into the trap of making everything all about us. We are the easiest X factor to fill in. We know us. We're somewhat self-aware. Some of it is narcissistic behavior. Some of this is simply the brain working the way the brain works. Path of least resistance. Take the data you do know and plug it in. So when someone's a jerk to you, we know ourselves best. So sometimes we plug ourselves into that equation when we aren't the missing X factor at all. Let's examine those all about me questions a bit more. Why would they behave this way toward me? What did I do to deserve this from them? I know they're both questions, but why and what are two different things. And look, sometimes you did do something to warrant a reaction. Again, personal responsibility. Compassion isn't forsaking one for the other. Compassion, as we're talking about for this topic, is simply thinking of other people's needs first, considering their point of view, offering benefit of doubt. If they wronged you, to warrant a response or punishment, shelve that until you've dealt with the compassion. Again, somebody cuts in front of us in traffic or rides our tails, we blow the horn and we flip them off. That's our default. But think of when you've accidentally cut someone off and we're so you were like in your car, oh, I'm so sorry. You're so apologetic in the car. No one can hear you. But yet it's easy to assume that person is just a jerk face. We react in a way that often is not reflective of how we would act in a face-to-face interaction. Are we just blowing off steam? Or are we desensitizing ourselves while dehumanizing others? Compassion. It's what the turn on the other cheek was all about. Maybe the person is just a selfish jerk, but doesn't showing them grace make yours the better of the two behaviors? Aren't you then on the moral high ground? I 100% guarantee it will make you feel better in the long run. And look, if you start with compassion, you don't look like an asshole when you find out the rest of the info. And if it turns out your first knee-jerk reaction was right, you still have room to be an asshole if you choose. My guess is that you won't. See, starting with compassion is a discipline. It isn't easy, but the payoff is so worth it for your soul and your blood pressure. Next, understanding. I think it isn't enough to just know or get it and watch using those phrases in communication with someone, when they give you information saying, oh, I know, or I get it, can shut down the flow of conversation. So think about that. If you already know, why should I keep going? In fact, maybe you do, maybe you don't. You don't know if you're going to know because you just said, I know. And the other person assumes you know. So, who knows? I believe understanding is fundamental to resolving conflict. I'm not talking about conflict as in a fight. Stress, resentment, and anything that stands in the way of a positive and productive relationship is conflict, right? So how do we reach a level of understanding? We've started with compassion, so let's stick with it. If you're liberal with your benefit of doubt, then you've crossed the first major hurdle to understanding. And isn't that part of what compassion is? A compassionate response is just offering benefit of doubt, especially to strangers. Once we're at benefit of doubt, that compassionate response, then we're open to new ideas. When we check our biases, when we pause before we speak or react, and when we do react, we do so with compassion. Well, it's like shampoo. Wash, lather, rinse, repeat. Except the more we repeat compassion, the closer we get to understanding, and we don't end up with dry split ends. It's like I said in the beginning, if we're open to the possibility that we might be wrong, being open to that doubt, that helps us reach that benefit of doubt response. Compassion is the spark plug that starts that engine. And if compassion is the spark plug that ignites the flame that starts the engine of understanding, what fuels understanding? What's that flame? Perspective. This is the hardest of all because it requires us to step out of our comfort zones, sometimes a little too much. After all, how could I, a white, mostly straight, cis-ish presenting man, however young the casting director thinks I look, how could I grasp the perspective of, well, anything but me? Perspective is a practice. We can respond compassionately with a clearer understanding once we master perspective. Walk a mile in another's shoes, my daddy used to tell me. There are a ton of cliches and even a few Aesop's fables. I'm an Aesop nerd. One of my favorites is the one about the fox and the lion. Remember that one? There's this fox who'd never seen a lion before. So one day while the fox is in the forest foraging, he fumbles across this ferocious feline of fantastic phenomena. The fox meets a lion for the first time and was scared almost literally to death, like heart pounding out of his chest, about to explode, paralyzed with fear, kind of scared. Now, the second time the fox came along the lion in that forest, he's still scared, but he noticed his heart didn't jump out of his chest. He didn't come close to dying. He's just a little scared, and he didn't know why. None of the things he was told would happen happened the first time he met the lion, or the second time. Now, that third time this fox came across the lion, well, he got a little bold and he figured, hey, if this lion ain't eaten me so far, maybe I'll ask him why. So that fox walks up to him and started talking to the lion. They had a conversation. The moral, in simpler terms, that fox was scared out of his mind at first because he saw the lion only as he was told or taught to. The second time, he was more calm and began to see the lion for what he was, not the stereotype or preconceived notion. The third time, a conversation started between them. And what do you think happened the fourth, fifth, 10th, 100th time? Academically put, acquaintance weakens prejudice. The more you know, the less you fear or hate. This is a story about having a diverse circle of perspective. Perspective is a practice. It's hard seeing things from another angle. It's even harder when we look around at our own little echo chambers and see that there isn't clear representation from that angle in our lives. Except many people don't look and see that. They aren't even aware of the absence of diversity. In other words, we talk a lot about stuff we couldn't begin to comprehend. Again, having an opinion is easy, but doing the work to solidify that opinion, well, that's more than most want to do. This is why diversity in all facets is essential to our understanding perspective. It's painful sometimes to reflect on our own behavior or how our words or actions affected someone else. But we must. It's vital. And if I'm being honest, I think a lot of society's ills today stem from a lack of compassion, understanding, empathy, and perspective. Because this is where it gets good. If our little spark plug of compassion ignites those fumes of perspective to fuel our engine of understanding, then guess what we emit? No, not carbon emissions. It's a metaphor for crying out loud. Support. We emit support. Think about that word. Support. We use it so much for so many things, and its meaning is so powerful. I do a lot of support work for non-custodial fathers and parents, family, who are denied their child. I have a similar story with a successful outcome. A happy ending, so to speak. But I'm supportive of that cause. I support individuals with a listening ear or advice. Child support is a big topic in that arena, and part of the intent of that is to provide a more stable life for the child when used properly. Support beams keep a building from collapsing, and I support causes related to suicide prevention too, because it's personal to me. Support. It simply means to give assistance to. I think in America, especially in the South where I grew up, we're taught so much to depend on ourselves that needing help is somehow looked down on. And I think welfare shaming and classist elitism for that. Toxic white Southern culture. We all need support, and I'm just not sure we truly get there to support without the steps mentioned before it. Compassion, understanding, and perspective. If you find yourself falling down a bit, maybe you don't need a new engine. Maybe you just need a new spark plug. Refresh your compassion. See if it starts. One last thought before wrapping up. I saw a meme on social media that basically said, maybe you've got too much on your plate. Maybe someone else's plate is smaller and they have less room for the stuff. Maybe someone else's plate is a paper plate and it's not as strong as your plate, and it's collapsing under the weight of what's piled on it. Cups. We truly never know what someone is dealing with or struggling with, even if we've known them our whole lives. That's why the end result of support is so essential. We don't know their X factor. That's why it's so important to begin with compassion as our default setting, our default response. And that's how C.U.P.S could help you solve the human mathematical equation. A compassionate response yields more information. More information helps us fill in the blanks. C plus U divided by P multiplied by S equals X. That'll usually get you to the missing factor in someone's equation. It's just math, man. All these factors and figures and facts surround us and make us who we are. We are the sum of all our parts, after all. And all those parts aren't pretty. Some are pretty ugly. Some are hard to move on past. Some we never do. And that's all right. But when we teach and learn using S.O.A.P, a social, occupational, academic, and practical approach to education for a well-rounded, prepared child, and when we're faced with the bullshit of life, we use C.U.P.S. Compassion, understanding, perspective, support. We will see better outcomes for our relationships and better outcomes for ourselves. Imagine how much better you'll feel when you release that negativity of assuming someone's an asshole and embrace the possibility that maybe they're just a human being, just like you, trying to live their lives just like you. And sometimes they're grouchy, mean mugging, or tailgating someone, just like we all do, sometimes, whether we know it or not, whether we're willing to admit it or not. This isn't about a political party, ideology, religion, class, gender, identity, or race. Well, except the human race, humanity and all. In this regard, we truly are just one people. And there are universal truths about us regardless of our specific labels. We all need to give a little more love and get a lot less bullshit that stands in the way of feeling that love. We also need to get a lot more love and give a lot less bullshit that stands in the way of others feeling that love. More on that in the next episode. I hope you'll apply C.U.P.S to your daily life. Carry that with you throughout the day. And the more you use C.U.P.S with other people, the more you'll be comfortable using C.U.P.S with yourself. Because it really starts with you, doesn't it? Every time you see C.U.P.S, any C.U.P at all, I want you to think about what I said. Let the actual physical representation of a C.U.P be your reminder, because you see those C.U.Ps everywhere, right? C.U.Ps. Compassion. Let that be your default response. If nothing more, it keeps you from looking insensitive or foolish once you find out that X factor, that missing info. Understanding. Take the time to really listen and try to comprehend. Perspective. Step out of your own self, your own bubble, and try to see things from other points of view. There are often more than two. Support. Have this be your end game. To be a compassionate, understanding, supportive person who is sensitive to perspective. Be the person with your arms wide open for an embrace, or the angry person with their finger extended. That choice, just like it always has been, is yours to make. Coming up, now that we're knee-deep into why people act like selfish jerks sometimes, and how we can better handle that, let's take a look at why we are the selfish jerks sometimes. The peril of perspective is next, peeling back those layers of perspective and taking another look at our human hat rack idea. Those hats we wear are more than just the roles we play in life. Those are the lenses through which we see the world, everything around us. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Make sure you do, and catch up on past episodes of Overthinking Everything as I'm deconstructing a culture of cultism. Thanks for joining me. Check out some of my other videos on YouTube. I've got all my original music, my TikToks, all of Overthinking Everything, and the clips of my acting and voiceover work. It's all organized in a playlist for you for your convenience. So check out my merch store, get all your Sir Talks-A-Lot swag, follow me on TikTok, like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Do all the things, and well, if you like this series, consider a donation to Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, or subscribe on Patreon. I'm Josh Brandon, and I'm overthinking everything.